Final Fantasy. It's one of the oldest, still thriving game series in video game history. Spanning back to its first game in 1987, it still has regular releases today, with the Final Fantasy VII Remake being the most recent one in 2020. However, despite how old this game series is, I got into the series relatively late into it. It wasn't until the 10th game that I discovered the universe of Final Fantasy. Don't get me wrong, you can start anywhere, as every game is its own separate story and world altogether, with various motifs, themes, and characters' names being the only thing that linked them together. However, this wasn't just my first Final Fantasy game, but it was also my first JRPG, and the game that got me into JRPGs. I really loved the story, the characters, and just the overall world of Final Fantasy X. I loved how you could pay attention to every cutscene through multiple runs through the game. I did many runs through this game, and still not fully understand the world unless you talk to NPCs or went wiki diving. And that's exactly what I did. One day during school, when I was in high school, I realized that I didn't really understand this game I've finished many times very well. So I decided to start looking things up on Wikipedia while in class. Yeah. What I found was a whole nother layer to the world of Final Fantasy X that I didn't even know was there, and to this day I still find Spira, the world of Final Fantasy X, to be one of the most interesting worlds in a video game. So much so that I actually wanted to know how the towns fared and advanced after the events of Final Fantasy X. And so we got Final Fantasy X-2, which, well, we'll get to that. Anyways, it is because of all that I decided this would be a great game for my next lore series, as just like Xenosaga, it has quite a bit of information before the actual game takes place. Although, definitely not as much as Xenosaga. So, with all that being said, let's dive into the world of Spira and start the first video of my Final Fantasy X story series. Chapter 1: Fiends and Fireflies. This chapter will probably be very short because, unlike Xenosaga, Final Fantasy X does not have a lot of, if any, information on what happened in the early years of the beginning of its universe. The only real ancient information about Spira, the world of Final Fantasy X, we have is that apparently fiends were the first beings that existed in Spira before any kind of humans or animals. At least that's according to a young researcher called Shinra. He discovered these findings after studying a fiend type called Adamantortis, which I may be mispronouncing. But I feel like that doesn't really make much sense. The idea that fiends existed before any other kind of beings existed on Spira. Why do I think that? Well, let's explore what a fiend is. But for that, we're gonna have to introduce these things called Fireflies. Despite their name, Fireflies are not insects. They're not even really sentient. Fireflies are a naturally occurring phenomenon in Spira that are shrouded in much mystery. They're essentially the nanomachines of Final Fantasy X. Can't explain something? Fireflies. But to be fair, it's not to such a bad extent as Metal Gear Solid with the nanomachines. Anyways, Fireflies are a type of spiritual energy that manifests as free-floating lights that, from a distance, can resemble luminescent insects. They are all over Spira, but cannot be seen under normal circumstances. When something dies, its life energy reacts to these Fireflies and makes the Fireflies glow, making them temporarily visible and also giving the illusion that they're coming out of the body. Fireflies also harmonize with water very well, and because of this, the people of Spira use Fireflies for many different types of technology. For example, Fireflies react and can record memories and audio information of someone. So, using that ability and condensing the Fireflies into water, one can create what is simply known as a sphere, which is essentially like a video recorder that allows recording and viewing of visual and audio information. Fireflies are also used in one of Spira's most popular sports called Blitzball. Honestly, it's the only sports that you see in Final Fantasy, so it may be the only sport. Blitzball is essentially soccer, but underwater, in a floating ball of water. In Blitzball, the use of Fireflies is twofold. One, they use to congeal the water into a perfect spherical shape which is held up by machines. Two, The Fireflies in the water sustain the player, thus allowing them to stay in the water for prolonged amounts of time without having to come up for air. Fireflies are used in many other things in the world of Spira, and we could be here for a long time if I kept going, so let's focus on why Fireflies are important to the creatures I mentioned before, Fiends. See, when a person dies, the customary thing to do is for a person called a Summoner to perform a sending on their dead body. I'll explain what a Summoner is later, but if I do it now, this title is going to keep branching into other topics, and I'm just trying to explain one thing right now, the Fiends. So, ascending is a ritualistic dance that summoners perform in order to send the spirits of the living to what is called the far plane, a place in the heart of Spira where all the souls go and that is very saturated with Fireflies. Sometimes, if a person is able to accept their death, a sending isn't necessary as the soul will just make their way to the far plane themselves. But most of the time, if a sending isn't performed, the soul will remain in the land of the living, envying the living. This envy eventually turns to resentment, anger, and even hate. Fireflies react to these strong emotions of hate and condense it to a body called, you guessed it, a fiend. Fiends are just bodies made out of Fireflies that act out purely on the emotion of whatever unsent soul created them. Because of that, they're not really sentient, more like hate manifested into a physical form by Fireflies. There are other types of beings like this which are created by someone's wishes, dreams, or emotions reacting with Fireflies. This is the reason I say that it doesn't make much sense that fiends existed before anything else, because by their nature, fiends kind of require living things to exist and die in order to exist. But Shinra, the kid who discovered this, was a character in Final Fantasy X too, so I don't remember. Maybe they just retconned this. Aside from becoming fiends, unsent souls can also become, well, beings called unsent. They are much like fiends in the sense that they are made up of Fireflies, but they retain their sentience and original look instead of turning into monsters. This happens only in very rare occasions if someone with a strong sense of purpose or duty towards an unfinished goal dies before meeting their goal. Some unsent are able to take advantage of their unsent state to absorb more Fireflies in order to change their form and achieve greater powers and abilities. Once a fiend is defeated, the Fireflies that make them up disperse and the soul is, presumably, sent to the far plane. However, an unsent can also be sent to the far plane by either achieving the purpose that kept them in the physical world or by ascending performed by a summoner. In very rare cases, a soul that is sent to the far plane can force its way out of it if it has a strong attachment to the physical world. Chapter 2: Bevel and Xanarkand. At some point, human and other sub-races came to be in Spira. The use of magic became very prominent in Spira, but eventually, the use of Machina surpassed the use of magic. Machina is just a fancy word for machines. It's literally the Spanish word for machines, Machina. Approximately 1,000 years before the events of the first game, two major city-states existed: the Machina-heavy Bevel and the summoner city of Xanarkand. Both of these cities used Machina, but Bevel focused mainly on Machina than Xanarkand, whereas Xanarkand preferred to rely on magic in their summoners. Now would be a very good time to talk about what summoners are. To put it simply, summoners are Firefly-sensitive mages who are trained to excel in the conjuring of weapons and creatures via the control of Fireflies. At least, this is their role during this time period in Spira. Later on, however, they will become even more important. For now, summoners live and train in a far-off island called Besaid Island. Over in Bevel, there was a mechanic named Alb. Alb somehow created a new race of people called Bettles. These people could not use magic, but they excelled at using Machina. From what I gathered, but I couldn't fully confirm, they were used as slaves to create weapons. Alb told people that they were robots, and because of that, he made them wear masks to hide their faces. The weapons created by the Bettles were so devastating that they were under constant surveillance and was said to be the catalyst that would start a war between Zanarkand and Bevel. This war would be called the Machina War. During this war, summoners made their own faiths. A faith is someone who willingly gives up their life to seal their soul in a statue. Using this statue, a summoner can summon a powerful being called an Aeon. The Aeon itself is a being made of fireflies reacting to the dreams of the beckoned faith. In other words, the faith, the souls inside the statues, dream of a form they wish to take, and when a summoner beckons them, this form is created via fireflies to fight for the summoner. The faiths that the summoners would make would usually be created via someone whom they share a strong connection with, as this would strengthen their bond with the Aeon. At some point during the war, Bevel, in a move to try to get rid of Zanarkand's summoner forces, bombs Besaid Island. One of the summoners who was drafted into the war was a peace-loving singer called Len. Knowing that this would mean certain death for her, Len's boyfriend, Shuyin, somehow managed to sneak into Bevel in an attempt to seize the most fearsome weapon, Vegnagun. Vegnagun is a weapon powerful enough to destroy all of Spira. It's essentially Spira's own Metal Gear. The only reason Bevel wasn't using it was because it couldn't tell friend and foe apart. Shuyin was eventually captured by Bevel forces, however, but he somehow escaped. I'm not sure that it's ever explained, but whatever. The moment he escaped, he continues to look for Vegnagun. Len caught wind of this from a Zanarkand spy, and so she too sneaks into Bevel to stop him. Their security must be ass. When she finds him, he is already inside Vegnagun and is activating it. Len, however, jumps in front of the behemoth of a weapon and cries out to Shuyin to stop him.
You must stop! That's enough!
But as he notices her, they both realize that behind Len, there are Bevel guards approaching. Seeing this, Shuyin jumps down to protect her, although there isn't much he can do. As Shuyin realizes the position he's put both of them in, the Bevel guards take aim. Shuyin and Len look at each other as the realization of their situation dawns on them. Once Len accepts that there is nothing either of them can do to get out of the situation, she decided to send off her love with a smile. And then Shuyin and Len die on the ground of the Vegnagun hangar, looking into each other's eyes. Before she dies, Len declares her love for him, but Shuyin dies before he can hear her. Chapter 3: Sin. An unknown amount of time later, the war was nearing its end and was looking like it was favoring Bevel and its Machina. Seeing their imminent defeat approaching, the leader of Zanarkand, who also happens to be its most powerful summoner, Yevon, gathered his people on a nearby mountain called Mount Gagazet. There, he and his people willingly decided that they would not let their city die. Instead, his people all decided to let Yevon turn them into faiths, gathering onto a wall on the mountain. Using these countless faiths, instead of an Aeon, Yevon used the dream of the faiths to summon an ideal version of Zanarkand. We call this Dream Zanarkand, one that would live on in its former glory, free of war, through the dreams of the faiths that were once the people of Zanarkand. As the summoning process for such a giant summoning would take a while, Yevon gathered any and all stray fireflies around him to form a living armor, which he would instill a set of instincts onto. 1. Wipe out any human settlements that gets too large. 2. Attack any and all Machina. 3. Respond to aggression with overwhelming force. And 4. To make sure Dream Zanarkand was never discovered and to protect it at all costs. This armor would come to be known as Sin by the people of Spira. Unfortunately, the strain of summoning and trying to control Sin was too great even for the great summoner Yevon. Sin just kept growing in size, becoming as big as a small town, and the toll it took on Yevon's mind turned him into a husk of his former self, and Yu Yevon became nothing more than an entity that could only continue to summon Sin. Having lost its controller, Yu Yevon, Sin was now merely a creature that acted on instincts, the instincts that Yu Yevon set on it. Thus, following the instincts that Yu Yevon instilled onto it, the first thing that Sin did was to destroy the first Machina civilization it found, that being the real Zanarkand. Afterwards, Sin unleashed its rampage on the forces of Bavel and continued to destroy any large city it came upon. The people of Spira were now united under their common fear of Sin. At this point, the people of Bavel came to believe Sin was summoned by Yu Yevon for the purpose of destroying all of Spira. Amongst the few survivors of Zanarkand were Yu Yevon's daughter, Yunalesca, and her husband, Zayon. When they returned to the ruins of Zanarkand, Zayon willingly sacrificed himself and allowed Yunalesca to turn him into a faith. Being husband and wife, the connection that Yunalesca had with Zayon was strong enough for her to summon an Aeon that could rival Sin. Yunalesca used this Aeon to fight and eventually defeat Sin. However, the moment that Sin was defeated, Yu Yevon, the husk that remained of him, transferred himself from Sin onto the Aeon created by Zayon and possessed it. This caused the link between Zayon and Yunalesca to be severed. Because this link between them was so strong, the shock caused by the severing of this link caused Yunalesca to die. However, she remained on Spira as an unsent. Yu Yevon, now having a new vessel, that being Yunalesca's Aeon, would remain dormant as he reformed the shell that is Sin around this new Aeon, a process that would take a couple of years at most. This began a period known as the Calm, more specifically, the First Calm. A calm is the time period between Sin's death and Sin's rebirth. A time period where people all over Spira could sleep without the fear of never waking up again. But death would not be the end of Spira's plight. In fact, it was only the beginning.